When I was finally notified that they had a hearing, and they said that Landy asked that he be transferred to Glen Rose where his mother was, and of course Scott Kilo said, this is just temporary. It's only going to be temporary, just until we find a place closer that it'll be the equal distance between the father and the mother. And well, that's been 4 years, and they never looked for a place. They never searched for a place. Scott Kilo had a meeting with after Luke had been placed down there. Scott Kilo and my attorney, Howard Britton, at that time was my new attorney, he met with Robert Bandy, Scott Kilo, Landy's wife, his mom, and my husband, and they were all met at Kilo's office, and they were going to discuss about this was supposed to be a mediation. However, they didn't want me there because Kilo said, well, you know, your wife's kind of crazy, and so we don't want her here. And my husband said, my wife is inquisitive, and if she has questions to ask, and of course Kilo had said she asks too many questions, and she just pesters them and hounds them. And my husband said, well, you know, my wife is one that if she wants an answer to something and she has a question, if you circumvent that, like Gary Marks did when she tried to ask him a question, then she'll just ask it in a different way. And if that doesn't work, then she'll ask it in another way until she can finally get an answer. And they just refused to give her any information. And so Kilo said, well, that's because she's just, you know, your wife is a little crazy, and your wife is a little, you know. And my husband was like, and he was trying to get my husband to say that, yeah, she is. And my husband was like, you know, that's not my wife. Well, anyway, further into it, Landy began to have a fit about the guardianship, and Mr. Kilo stated, and of course my husband was recording all this. Of course he didn't tell anybody, but he had a recorder in his pocket, so we have the whole entire thing recorded. And of course that was one of the things the judge confiscated was that tape, and that was one of our tapes and the recorders that he confiscated. And Kilo stated that we're going to make this her visitation so difficult that if she breaks one rule, we'll find her in contempt, and then they could disqualify me. Well, you know, my husband came home, we listened to the tape. I just knew I had to walk the line no matter what. Visitation privileges were set at Glen Rose, and they were, from the very beginning, no one was allowed to speak to me. It was just it was just horrible. That was Beverly's territory. Landy was in on it. Of course, you know, I don't know if I mentioned, but Baylor attorneys were at each of the hearings again. Again, when we got to Glen Rose, stage incidents were one after the other. They accused me of sitting in Luke's wheelchair and breaking it. And, of course, Bill had taken pictures of it, and it had been duct taped. The whole back of it was duct taped. The armrests, the steel plates that came out from underneath his arms had duct tape and sponge wrapped around it. And under Luke's arms were large cuts from where the duct tape was cutting under his arms. So I put socks. I took a pair of his socks that I brought him, and I put it on these steel bars underneath his arms. And I put it on the chair to at least soften it so that all of this would, you know, these cuts would heal. Well, they wrote me up for breaking his wheelchair, and I tampered with his wheelchair. And so the next thing that they said was they accused me of trying to put something in his peg feed. And she came in and she said, you know, you've trying to put something in his peg feed, which in reality, they did not have Luke's band on him. When you have a peg feed, you need to have a band there. So that, you know, Luke was very active with his left hand, and he would pull up his shirt, and, you know, this is just typical brain-injured boys that I've seen with my two friends, Patricia and Carmela, and their boys. And he would just pull up his shirt, and he would mess with his since that band was not on, he would pull at his peg feed, and I had turn on his CD player, and I was going to put on some Christian music, which I always did, and let him listen to. And when I turned around, Luke at the end of the peg feed, and he had the very end of it, and he was yanking on it. And so I grabbed it near his stomach and held on to it so he couldn't pull it out. And I tried to get it out of his fingers, which he had a hard grasp on. And, of course, the cap flipped off. Well, residuals started coming out. And just then, Bridget walks in and she said, "You're trying to put something down there." And I was like, "No." She said, "Why didn't you call for someone?" I said, "I can't reach the call button. His bed is a long ways in his room instead of most rooms when you walk in, the beds are here." Well, Luke's wasn't. You walked in the door and his bed is a long ways. There was a little curtain over here, but his call button was on the other side of the curtain. There's no way I could do this and reach over there. I said, it just happened. Well, she immediately sent a nurse in there and said that, and ordered them to check all the residual and see if there's any residual in there. She ordered me to bring my purse and come to the office. When I came to the office, she ordered me to empty my purse. When they found nothing in my purse, she wrote up that I called my attorney immediately. My attorney called and talked to her. He wrote a letter saying that they found no residual and that nothing had been put in his peg, and that, this was just a mix-up. And which I think is, we called Dad. When I called Dad to come down there, Dad said he does not have the agility to remove the cap from his peg feed, and therefore it's unsubstantiated. Now, in his records that I just received for the last 3 months, for January, February, March, it has in there, when Dad's came in, it said that Luke they were having problems because Luke kept removing the cap on his peg feed. And, of course, they ruled it when it was that case with me that it was unsubstantiated. So now it's in his medical records that he can, and he does pull up the cap to his peg feed. The thing is he's supposed to have a band on there that keeps him from doing that. After that had happened, the nurse asked me to come back in, and she said, "Will you help me put this band on Luke?" Well, she couldn't get the band on Luke because it was so small. It was too small for him, and she couldn't even tug to get it pulled around him. And she said, "Will you please help me to pull this around him and get this on him?" I had to actually tug, and she had to pull to get it Velcroed, and his skin just popped out above and below. And I was just sick. I thought, why did Dad even help her? And I said, "Why don't you order a larger one?" She said, "Well, we just haven't got around to it." And of course, another time I brought a lamp for Luke for Christmas, and I brought him a little keyboard that he could play on, and I brought him a lamp, and this lamp was where it had you could move the little light bulbs. There was 3 lights on it, and of course you can move them any direction you wanted. And that way, he didn't have to have the overhead light shining directly in his eyes constantly all day and all evening. And a lot of times they do at night, I guess. And so I wanted to have a lamp that was a lot softer. Well, Landy, the next week when I came, Landy had a note on the lamp, and it said, "Take the lamp home. Read your guidelines." And the guidelines said I wasn't allowed to bring anything into Luke's room. So they took the lamp, and what happened is when I went to leave, they had taken the lamp and they were going to put it up in her office and all. And my attorney said I had left, and I called him, and he said, "I want you to go back, and I want you to take pictures of the lamp. I want you to take pictures of the gifts that you gave him for Christmas and get pictures." Well, when I went back up there and I went to take pictures, Beverly was there, and she said, "She's not supposed to be here. She's not supposed to be here." And I said, "My attorney told me to come back and just take pictures of the lamp or whatever." Well, when I started to take pictures, she said, "She's yelling at me. She's saying hateful things. She's doing all this," which didn't happen. And so I immediately took the pictures and I left. They wrote me up for bringing things into Luke's room, that I was not allowed to bring things into the room unless I got the permission of the guardian, the temporary guardian, and that I had violated my visitation.